I promoted this session as, what did I say? You might be amazed what law firms can learn about CX from a book about food and
Yeah,
so much more. Do you think that's an accurate sort of description of the book?
very much so. It's I'll be honest, when I first started reading the book, I was definitely drawn to it from the food aspects as we discussed when we met. And it was pretty evident in the first couple of chapters or mini chapters that there was a lot more to this than just, understanding a restaurateur and how he's kind of built his brand and that. I really I connected with it quite quickly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too. Me too. I guess for people who are watching or who are listening, we should just set this up. So this is Alex Grace, who's the Director of Client Services at Lex Veritas, and we're talking about this book, Unreasonable Hospitality, and it's a book by Will Guidara. And the subtitle to the book is The Remarkable Power of Giving People More Than They Expect. And so, just the context, Alex and I met at a lunch in Brisbane and we were talking about food.
Yeah.
And for those people who know me well, I'm not really much of a cook. In fact, all I do is bring a box of cheesels if it's ever bring a plate. But anyway, I've become more and more interested in food. Alex is a little bit of an authority. Anyway, we got along like a house on fire. And he mentioned this book. I left and I read it, and voila, here we are talking about it because it is so much more than food.
Yes. Yeah. No, yeah, that's a great description of, I guess, our first meeting. We were at a lunch, and I mean, as you say, I really like talking about food. It's one of my passions. So, and that's what really drew me to this book in the first place. I've been lucky enough to go to New York a few times. My family. I was born overseas in the States. My father's worked in a number of different places in America. I've gone to New York a few times. So I was kind of knew what the book was going to be about before I started reading. And then I haven't actually been to 11 Madison Park. That's obviously kind of the center point of the restaurant of the book, I should say. But I have been to the Shake Shack that they bring up a fair bit. So
Oh,
the
yeah.
original Shake Shack, which so I actually, when you read a book and you can sort of visualize things, and it gives you
Yeah,
that
yeah.
the next level of depth. So as I started reading, I understood sort of, even though I hadn't been there, I was like, oh, I know where it is. I had that, that idea of where it sat in Central Park in New York. And it was just the first layer of me understanding, like, wow, this is actually a really special place, and what these guys have been able to do is really special. So yeah.
I guess we'll set that a little bit more context for the book for those of you who haven't read it, haven't got a clue what we're talking about. We'll get into a little bit of detail and just set some context and set the scene. But first, for those of you who don't know Alex or don't know Lex Veritas, that I always refer to as Lex, which is probably very naughty, but you are in the business of really reaching out to clients and assisting them with change. And I was cleaning out my shelves the other day and I found my 101 Dummies Guide to Latin. And I didn't really get very much further than the first page, but I do think there's something, Lex is something to do with truth and law, isn't this Lex Veritas?
Yeah.
That, yeah.
You've nailed it. So the name Lex Veritas, Lex is, well, in Latin, sort of legal, Veritas being truth. So like the name revolves around being that one source of truth for
Yeah.
lawyers, essentially. Yeah, and we help lawyers manage change in that kind of boutique space of working through, finance, HR, IT, issues and change management and things like that. I've been lucky to be working in the legal sector for over 15 years. I've worked for a long time in-house at a mid-tier law firm, coming up through the ranks of a one-day-a-week casual accounts clerk, up to doing sort of finance management. So, I've really had the full gamut of experience working with lawyers in a really busy firm, and now my role is essentially helping those firms just navigate through a time of change, or when they need extra support in any of those areas. They get to see my friendly face is usually the first one when they contact Lex to knock on the door. Whether that scares a few people off, we're not quite sure, but
I don't.
hopefully not.
I also For those people who like to know where you're coming from as well, I can see on your LinkedIn profile that you went to QUT, and I often get QUT and Queensland University mixed up. My excuse is that I went to school in Melbourne. But you've also just finished your Masters of Applied Finance. Is that right?
I'm due to finish it. Yes, this year.
Oh, we had balloons and confetti. I
Yeah.
mean, any masters. I mean, what a mega effort that is. Yeah, you would
Yeah,
be.
it's took a bit of a break when I had my son. So my partner and I had well, when I say a bit of a break, he's 3.5 now, so it's been a bit longer. But yeah, my undergrad, and it's funny, my background like is actually in high school teaching, and
Oh, right.
I was studying business, jumped out of it for a while. Started working in law, started studying high school teaching, and then I got to the end of that degree and qualified high school teacher, and realized I wanted to stay in the corporate world and stay with legal, which is why I jumped into the masters. And but it's funny, one of our clients I was talking to quite recently, who's the partner of a firm, he's also a qualified high school teacher, and we were talking about how the similarities between in our roles when you're in a client facing role, talking to people, whether it's a 13-year-old or a 36-year-old or a 56-year-old, there's a lot of shared skills there in terms of being able to communicate effectively, like,
Yeah,
uh,
it's a base degree.
yeah. So,
Yes,
yeah,
you
a
up.
bit of a different way around to kind of get to where I am now. But yeah,
When I think about what your role is, like really helping people with challenges, and I guess a big part of that is change. When I read Unreasonable Hospitality, just the short version of quite a long title of a book, when I read that, I was really amazed by a the owners of the restaurant and Will Guidara's passion, and
yeah,
how really he was so thoughtful around change in what was, if we set it up, 11 Madison Park is a Michelin starred restaurant, but it wasn't when they started. It
no,
was almost like a startup, wasn't it? And they went on to win, and it wasn't an easy road. They went on to win Michelin stars, and they also went on to win Restaurant of the World,
yeah,
not once, not twice. For those people who are listening and who are watching and work in law firm systems, which I always describe as quite ambitious, full of people who are into achievement and winning. This book is a really amazing tale. Well, I guess it's true, a factual kind of account of the very hard road with a massive creativity about how to get to the top.
yeah. And that's where there's a lot of alignment between specifically high-end Michelin star restaurants and the legal industry. And one of the main things I took away from it was you've nailed it. Like, there's a lot of high-performing individuals there. There's high expectations. There's high pressure. And it's why, I guess, yeah, for people listening, they might be wondering why, we see so much alignment between the restaurant you go to have your steak and veg, but obviously it's a lot more than that, and kind of working a 9 to 5, corporate job. But there's a lot of similarities between the pressures these people are under.
So, I mean, I guess from the top, like from a leadership point of view, they had the chef who was
Yep.
the sort of trained chef character in the book, and
Yep.
then Will, who was the front of house. They seem to have a strategic ability to work together, even though they seem quite different.
Yep.
If they had had a had a different kind of relationship, it might not have worked.
Yeah, there was definitely an appreciation between front of house and back of house. And that's where that kind of, your concept of the fee earner versus the fee burner is definitely in that alignment. And, I think if you think about traditional business models, when we're comparing a restaurant and a law firm, there is that kind of power dynamic of, I'm the one putting out the food. So I'm the chef and I have control over this because people are coming here to really not see me, but see my food and eat my food. And in a
Yeah.
law firm, there's a lot of that. People are coming here to seek my legal advice and my expertise. And what Will and Daniel, I think Daniel Thum is the way you pronounce it, but the chef at 11 Madison Park were able to do is kind of say, well, we actually want to create a holistic experience here whereby, people are coming here not just to eat that food, but also they know they're going to get great service. And it extended, of course, to the employees as well, which is something I'm sure we'll talk about. But I think that relationship in the restaurant that they were able to build for their staff was probably one of the things I took away, that we could really learn from in our industry. Yeah.
I thought that was really amazing. Like how he was really, I didn't actually understand, I've been in law firms too long, I guess. I sort of think it's all about us, but that whole fee earner and fee burner thing, how that was the chef is the maestro, and that the front of house people who are greeting the guests and setting the tables and choosing the linen and creating that experience. I didn't actually understand that there was a hierarchy in restaurants.
Yeah.
And the heart of this book, I think, is Will being the front of house guy, really leveling that up so that there was, in some ways, a real equality, wasn't it? And he also then, you mentioned the staff, and he was really into empowering people to create this culture
Yeah.
of people really buying in to what it is they were trying to achieve.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think there's a key concept there that he talks about, and that's the corporate smart versus hospitality smart, and how, like the organization, and it is transferable. Like the organization that he was a part of, with, well, for the most of the book, that 11 Madison Park, he was really trying to make them, hospitality smart, which meant caring about the people, but then he also had to put that level of corporate smarts in. Now, if we're thinking about a traditional business model, whether it is a restaurant, a law firm, an accounting firm, most would probably say they align more with the corporate smart side of things, like process, procedure. We have an end revenue target in sight, and how are we going to achieve that? But, especially more so in today, in 2024, people care about how they are helping on that journey, and actually, how it feels to be empowered to actually assist on that, a lot more deeper through an organization than those traditional models. And but Will still makes the point during the book that he spent time in a very structured, corporate, smart kind of environment, and he took the best things about that and brought it into that hospitality smart to kind of make that hybrid model. And I think that's why it really worked, because it should be said as well, like Will's clearly a very talented individual. Like he was, in the book, he was, I think 22 when he was sort of assistant general manager. Like at 22 years old, I think I was, in between degrees and spending most of my weekends down at the pub. Like, there wasn't really, there's no way I would have been ready to be assistant general manager to run a high-end New York restaurant. So, I think it's one of the things when I did my recent sort of reread of this for our chat, I was like, really appreciated how he clearly is a very talented individual, and has some great aspirations and goals, and he's nailed it. Yeah.
I love some of the stories that he shares in the book, and that idea of him being very talented. And if for those people who are listening or watching, if you ever do get the book, he doesn't shy away from perfectionism, which is something that is sometimes, just in law firms, perfectionism is a derailer. But he really sort of embraces that perfectionism. And I do love that story. And he has loads of stories in there about, wins, but also lots of stories about failing. But I did love that story that he made that observation about. They had this guy, I think his name was Marquez or something, that was his surname. And he was not very good at being a table runner.
Yeah.
And he just, he was a bit lackadaisical, wasn't really into it. But what he discovered by talking to him and through observation was that this guy had an absolute passion for food, and they moved him into a different role, and the guy just took off and added so much value to the business.
Yeah.
It was that kind of thing where he was really in this really intense environment. He was shaping people and paying attention to detail like that.
Yeah, he definitely had that's a great example, because he had a great ability to kind of find that quality in somebody and elevate them into a position where they would thrive. He talks about in that exact scenario, he learned a lot of that from his father. During the book, there's a lot of reference back to his dad, who was clearly a very influential individual in his life. And his dad served in the army and had a similar one where there was the guy who was part of his dad's platoon who was pretty useless, except they figured out that his navigational skills were immaculate. So, instead of having him kind of on the front line and getting ready to fight in the Vietnam War, they went, well, actually, you're a great navigator. So you can be repurposed. And that's something that business leaders should be really thinking about, you know, not everyone is going to, just because you put someone new into a role that you might have had existing, they're not always going to fit that same bucket, are they? There's we think about a lawyer, an accountant, a financial controller, and what that job description is, and that's great, like to have that set of skills, but people usually have something unique to offer, and it's kind of understanding exactly what that is and how the business can utilize that, because if you don't get around to doing it, I'm sure they will feel undervalued and they might move on, and then the next place might do it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's kind of why, if people watching, or listening, I really encourage you to get this book, because there's a lot of moments like that kind of, are a bit of like an aha moment, like, oh, I'm sure, like I've noticed it in our team, like where I've been able to better utilize people and gone, well, you actually more fit this bucket. Let's give it a crack here. And it's worked out really well.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And I think I did like, somewhere in the book he talks about, so I always think about, well, it's a restaurant business, it's about food. But he actually has a reframe on that's completely different. He sort of says it's about human connection.
Yeah.
That what he's doing is about human connection. And that's a completely different take on what I would think running a restaurant is. I would think it's transactional, it's
Yeah.
about bums on seats, it's about providing great service, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But he talks about it being about caring human connection or something like that. But human connection was the essence of what he was on about.
Yeah, and they, as the restaurant evolves, there's that big focus on experience, right? So
Yeah.
that, and that's something that what I did know about 11 Madison Park coming into the book, I knew that there was this whole concept of them creating really unique diner experiences for people. And it was something that no one had ever done before. And, let's be honest, if we're talking about law firms in Brisbane, we're not going to be able to get a limousine to take a family out to play in the snow and do that sort of thing. So, there's a line somewhere. And, Will and the team at 11 Madison Park clearly are able to exceed those things. But there's a big lesson there to be learned as well about that, like, holistic experience of avoiding that transactional nature, because you're right. Like, when I go to a restaurant, and most establishments, and this is why they are so unique, you go there, your experience, yeah, there's a bit of that interaction of like the waiter and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, if I'm going to leave a restaurant review, 90% of it's going to be based on that food that's served to me. Whereas, reading that book, it made me just want to go, and I kind of was wondering, like, I wonder what they'd do for me, like, would they, go and get me, there's a story about them getting, a hot dog from a hot dog street
I
vendor in New
love that
York.
story.
Yeah. And that's been adapted into there's a TV show on Disney called The Bear, about food, which has been great. So I'm across all them, but like people have used like other elements of culture that have actually adopted some of these things. Yeah, it's really interesting.
That story about the hot dog was fantastic. So, for those who haven't read it, there are some people who are in the restaurant, 11 Madison Park, and it's their last day, and they're enjoying, a high-end meal in a fancy restaurant. But they were lamenting the fact that they hadn't tried a hot dog. That's right, isn't it? Something like
Yes.
that.
Yeah. They were leaving New York that afternoon or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Will and the team, what did they actually? They went down and
They actually went out to the vendor. So well, to provide a bit more context, as Will was kind of building this holistic experience of front and back house, there was a team, I think he called them the Imagineers, or that's a Disney term, but something like that, where he actually had this team of people who specifically worked on creating experiences for the guests. And yeah, he got one of these experience guest creator people to run down to a hot dog vendor, and they walked, I think he said they grabbed a dozen hot dogs and he took them back to the chef, who's a fine dining chef. So this is someone who's already got 2 Michelin stars, and said, we've got a table of people here who want to eat a hot dog. And I think they kind of Michelin starified it a little bit, but essentially they served someone that was paying, $400 a plate, a bunch of hot dogs, and they loved it. But that was the thing,
yeah,
like this this story is quite famous in the dining community because this group of people absolutely loved it, and it kind of flipped the whole concept of its head of like, yeah, they're paying a lot of money to come here and eat fine food, but you've actually brought something to them that they otherwise would never have experienced.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. And he's very big on that, isn't it? And I guess in terms of his leadership approach and making this business the huge global success that it was at such a young age, it seems that this doing more than what is reasonably expected seemed to be, par for the course at 11 Madison Park. And I noticed that, for people who work in marketing and BD around their approach to those awards. I mean,
yes,
they're doing field trips,
yeah,
to keep an eye on the competition, which is, difficult for law firms to do. But this idea
yeah,
of gathering, but also taking it on as a gargantuan task, and they were prepared to throw everything at it to win rather than, you know, a tender. Sorry, it's been in my email for a week. It's due on
I know, yeah,
Friday. And then we
yeah.
don't win. And it's like, oh, yeah, these guys in awards were next level, weren't they?
Yeah, and you kind of had to be in that industry, like it's a saturated market of uh, everyone pushing for these high esteem, this top restaurant in the world, and we spoke early on about this high achieving thing. I think that's one thing that really set Will and this Daniel and that whole team out from the rest is that they really pushed to get to. They had a goal in mind, and they went above and beyond anything I've ever seen or heard of in any other industry. But there's a lot to learn from that. As you say, a field trip, it's a bit different. A field trip to a nice restaurant in New York's obviously a little bit different to, going next door to your competitor or something like that. So probably a bit more appealing, but the lengths they went to were massive. Yeah.
But that idea of being switched on to what competitors are doing, I think that is often one of the conversations that I've had with people who are on pathway to partnership, or even, is like it is like thinking and noticing about what the competition is doing, because we can get a bit caught up within the four walls. Like
Yep.
that idea, they were very focused out, but they were also very focused in, which is a very I thought that was an amazing thing too, how equally they tended to focus out and in.
Yeah, and uh, I'll talk about something that our CEO Duncan here talks about a lot, and when we're talking to clients is, every law firm has its own secret sauce. So, what that source is made up of, the firm's culture, the people that work there, that work that they're doing for their clients, and no one will be able to ever replicate that secret sauce, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't look at other places in your same field, that their process, procedures, technology, what sort of things they're doing to help make you more efficient. I think there's a bit of a, you know firms need to come to that understanding that they're there because people want to work with them, and there's no risk of kind of, I say there's no risk, but you know what I mean? There's no risk of that overlap happening. If you've got a really strong brand and a really strong culture, that's what's drawing people to you. And it's just looking at those peripheral things where you can actually make that more efficient. I think there's something that can really be learnt there in law.
Yeah, these guys are fine tuning and experimenting all the time, and that taking risks, I think, and not everything he tried worked, and he's pretty candid about a lot of the things that didn't work. But I did really like when he sort of, he would often talk about this wisdom that he gathered from his dad. And I thought that was a really beautiful connection. And I thought it was a really wise thing as well. You don't have to think it all up yourself. You can draw on the
Yeah.
experience of others. But he also said somewhere in the book about serving people what you'd like to receive.
Yes.
And I thought, in terms of the customer experience, he just seemed tuned into that. He's got all these people, they've got all these things going on, they've got these really big, ambitious targets, but he was really able to stay in this understanding what the customer experience was. And yeah, I wondered what you thought about that for firms.
Yeah, I think that plays into something that probably was one of the biggest resonators with me in the book, and that's this making the charitable assumption, which is another thing that he talks about.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I think, and I'll dive into this in two separate ideas. So the customer experience side, when you're dealing with a wide array of different people every day in hospitality and the same in legal. You know, your client base is completely broad. And if I'm talking from a Lex Veritas point of view, our clients who are lawyers are also very diverse. You know, there is factors outside of what happens that you can control that you just don't know. So he talks about this whole thing about making the charitable assumption that, you know, when you go into a situation, assume that if someone is not their self or they're reacting negatively towards you, let's just pick ourselves up and let's be more positive and just try and change that attitude for them, and make sure if they're all right, and ask those sort of questions. And I think from a customer experience point of view, that's something that's really valuable, because everyone has bad days. We all know that there are certain people that are going to be more difficult to deal with than others. But let's come from the angle, instead of being defensive on that, let's come from the angle of, how can I help make your day better, essentially, you know? And
Yeah.
then, yeah, and then essentially the same works, and Will's a big thing about this for his own staff. You know, as a business leader, you know, as a law firm leader, you're going to have the same things. You work with a diverse group of employees, a diverse group of individuals. There's a lot of factors, and that multiplies out. The bigger you get, I'm sure these problems are bigger for bigger firms, because you simply have less touch points with the amount of employees you've got. Make that charitable assumption if someone's, you know, 10 minutes late to a meeting, or, you know, they've fallen a bit behind abnormally with their billed fees for 1 month or something. Instead of being, you know, questioning their work ethic and what's going on, if you have that charitable assumption, they're going to feel more connected to you and think like, oh, well, this person actually cares about my well-being. So that was definitely one of the core messages that he talks about a lot, that I really took away, and I actually try to implement, or hopefully I am implementing that a lot in our sort of day to day. Yeah.
I thought it was really beautiful too. And I guess another part of that, in how I guess in a way that's reflected, was that he was quite a reflective guy, and I think the book is so rich of examples is because he had journals and things to draw on, and that process of reflecting seemed to really help the business as well, because he was going back to his notes and then sharing things at those, I guess in law firm land we'd call them strategy days, but you know, it sort of surprised me that he was having everyone in the restaurant, and you know, at these days where they would, you know, share information and almost like an after action review, and
Yeah.
everyone was on the path, you know, like, this is where we're trying to go, this is our strategy, this is what we want to do. And as big as it was, he was including them.
Yeah,
And
there was a lot of collaboration the whole way through, wasn't there?
yeah, I thought that was really good. So now I know we're running out of time, but I would say I know that you shared this with your team.
Yes.
You actually read the book and then shared some of the key points that with your team. I want to know how that was, and how did it go down with the team?
It was good. Like, it's I did we do well, we try and do them regularly, roughly monthly. It's called a Lex Learn, so internal learning session. That was established prior to me reading the book, and you know, it's because that's similar concept again to what, you know, I think Will does them very frequently in the book. There's like I said, a lot of collaboration, but we had these sessions set up, and you know, it's just open for a different rotation of people in the business, present something that, you know, can be peripherally relative, or, you know, maybe it's talking about one of our services or something like that. So I read the book, did a presentation based on the key messages that I picked up in the book. And yeah, it was really well received, because our business is all about kind of, you know, we want to be a really top provider to the boutique and mid-tier law firms, and giving them a top tier experience, essentially. So all the concepts of, you know, a Michelin starred restaurant and what that sort of means were very you know, transferable to our business as well. And I think one of the key concepts I spoke about that they mentioned is that you know, offensive and defensive positioning as well. So yeah, there's a lot of sport analogies, and I had to say I love that, because I'm big into sport. So maybe that's why I also enjoyed the book. But you know, he talks about a lot, and this is one of the key messages we brought into at the business, was when you are, you know, on the back foot a bit, you're playing defense, you really go above and beyond to make sure that that person feels valued, because not everyone is going to have a great day. Like we said, that charitable assumption. So if you're a bit on the defense, promote that person to a really high level of regard, and make sure that you can then move back onto offense. And offense is when you can add your value, like it's when you can take someone and go, hey, this client, we're doing such a great job for them. I'd like to extend our service and offer this as well, or something like that. And that's when you're on offense, and that's when you're really showing that worth. So yeah, that was probably one of the main concepts. And I like to think that everyone absorbed that, and we do utilize that in the business. I got a lot of positive feedback from it, and I definitely think if other business leaders are going to read this book, and like I said, I highly encourage. There's a lot of things. I mean, we've only just touched on a very small amount of the concepts that they talk about, and it's not just law. Like he makes some direct examples about how this is applicable to real estate and all these other industries as well. Like it really is. The concepts are universal if you know how to apply them properly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fundamentally a book about really remarkable leadership, isn't it? And this idea of, the remarkable power of giving people more than they expect. It's not that every firm or every business can turn their private dining room, cover it all with sand and turn it into, I think, some kind of Caribbean honeymoon experience.
Holiday. Yeah.
That's probably, at the other end of the spectrum. But I think there are principles like we've covered, and there's more in the book. It's true, we have only touched the surface about how you think and approach the business of working with clients, and how you think about yourself in relation to that. And then I think having the guts too, isn't it? It really, it's a pretty gutsy book.
Yeah, and he backs himself, a lot. Like, and like you say, it's not about the showy stuff either. Like you say, like if we look at reality in the professional services, we're not all going to be able to, grab, like I said, limos, do the sand, buy 100 bottles of Dom Perignon to give out to our clients and our staff. Like as much as that, I'm sure there are businesses out there doing it, and that's great. And if you're doing that, please, I'd love to meet you. Just invite me to your Christmas party. But it's the fundamental. It's the human level that was really just transfer of treat others how you want to be treated, and that goes all the way from the top to the bottom. And look, I'm hoping I know. Well, is this a spoiler? Will's obviously not. He's not involved with the restaurant anymore. Sorry to anyone who's reading, but yeah, he writes that the book was and one of the things that he talks about a lot during that time and the adversity, because it was actually only published quite recently. So there's some post-COVID stuff in there. Like there's actually a lot of things. I could talk for hours about it, honestly. But it's that human level and him trying to find the next challenge. And I'm really looking forward. I hope he has a follow-up book about how he approaches that, because I'm sure it's going to be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's essentially, like you say, he started when he was very young. There was COVID. They did all the kind of, correcting for that. They've won all those. He achieved everything, didn't he?
Yeah.
And now he's kind of gone on and set up his own company, which is
his wife's also very successful in the hospitality industry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's supporting her. I'm sure there's still big things to come, but he's definitely built some groundwork of that. Should also mention as well that Bossy had originally Danny Meyer is also, I haven't read anything of his yet, but I know he's got a couple of books out. I'm really keen to get into those, because that's where a lot of these concepts also come from.
Yeah, that kind of wisdom, like from his father and from his mentors, was a really big thing in the book. And I think that's also something that everyone can learn who's got a leadership role. Now, I'll just hold this up one more time. That's it. Move this way. Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara. And if we've whet your appetite and you're wanting to book a ticket to New York, I did some Googling before we did this. And for those of you, well, some of you may be disappointed, but 11 Madison Park is now 100% plant-based. And that's a whole other story, how a Michelin star restaurant goes to plant-based, and they are still quite successful, very successful. But for an Australian, you can have the degustation, 10 courses. It's going to set you back $550, or you can have the 6 for about $250. And personally, I think if I'm going to New York, I'd be trying to book in, because the book was amazing and I'm totally entranced by this place.
100%. Definitely keen to go. If you're not a big reader, the audiobook is also fabulous, and Will actually narrates it.
Oh,
So
okay.
you get a lot of, I've done both. So I've done the hard copy and the audiobook, because you get a lot of when someone narrates their own work, sometimes you just get that extra bit of sort of meaning and emotion behind it. So you can
Yeah.
tell I'm a fan. If yeah.
Well, I'm really glad, Alex, that we got around to having this conversation. And I do recommend the book to people who haven't read it and who have leadership roles or leadership ambitions. It's a really enjoyable read. It's really well written as well. The stories are fantastic. And I do think there's a lot of application to law firm life, as we've discussed. So I guess we'll leave it there. And I just want to say thanks again, Alex. I really enjoyed the book, and I really enjoyed our conversation about it. So thank you very much, and I'll see you one day in Brisbane, perhaps.
Sounds great. Thank you very much for chatting, and talk to you soon.